As promised, this is the last of the planned concerning Primuses. I am hopeful that over the past 2 weeks and this week, you guys will have given me additional ideas of things that you'd like me to cover the lore of. If you don't, that's fine. I have other things to talk about, things like currency or the politics of how the nation works or things like that. I've got other things to talk about, but I was hopeful to at least engender some interest from my viewers. But for now, today, we're going to talk about Desolation. Now this is funny because we actually have very little to talk about, really. This is probably going to be a short episode. See, in character, the viewers, the players, most people still don't actually understand Desolation. I mean, I do. I know exactly what Desolation is, but that's because I built this world. But most people just view it as in their own particular light. Now, let me try to explain what Desolation is as best as I can. And I'm going to fail at this because it's kind of a complicated thing. Being a desolate means that you are wrong in some way with regards to the elemental energy that makes up your living being. That wrongness affects other people's in a variable way. Now let's say that there is someone you just met, and they say, hey, and you're like, hey. And they, in game terms and in lore terms, they basically have to roll a will save. They have to resist your desolation. See, the weird thing about Desolation is it doesn't really affect you all that much. Except for a few very, very rare cases. It affects those around you. So, if they succeed at their will save, nothing changes. They're not even aware that anything is different or has happened. If they fail at it, well, this is where things get tricky. Now, like I said, this is someone you just met, so they are just as likely to literally start physically attacking you on sight. And the funny thing is, you might be like, oh, because they hate Desolates, right? Because everyone hates Desolates. Well, that's not actually true. The vast majority of attacks on people who are Desolates, they don't realize they're attacking a Desolate, because that's not what goes through your mind. You don't look at someone and say, oh, I hate that Desolate. You look at someone and you say, I hate that person for their shoes, or their clothing choice, or their skin color, or their gender, or their race. You kind of get how this works out. So a large amount of the hatred-style crimes and otherwise unpleasantness in the world have been actually people who have been hating Desolates, because what will happen is your mind will invent a reason to hate that person. It'll latch onto something, anything, and just use that as an excuse to pour vile at them. And again, this often leads to physical violence. Now, that's a case of a total stranger. We've actually seen what happens when you're with someone who you know intimately and have been friends with for some time. Guido and Snarg, for example. Snarg had to more or less continuously roll will saves against Guido's mere existence. And he kept succeeding, and one time he failed. Now, there's no hard and set rules for how this works, but basically, the less reason you have to hate a person, the more likely it is that the more layers of bad it will get before it gets to that I'm going to attack you on sight level, which is the furthest level down. Even most normal people will usually go down to verbal hatred and whatnot before they have to then be provoked into the physical violence level. So Snarg just started acting like Guido was just dumb and stupid and he didn't like him, and then he failed a second will save later on, and that pushed him down even further, to the point where he just didn't want to have anything to do with Guido. Here's the screwed up part, though. Snarg is well aware of the fact that Guido is a Desolate, and Snarg knows how Desolation works, and yet at no point in time would it ever have occurred to him that he was being affected by that Desolation, because that's not how it works. It just affects you, it just hits you, and your mind invents a reason, naturally, for you to hate that person. And when he succeeded at his will save, and went back to the point where he was acting normally, there was no difference in his mind. From Snarg's perspective, from Snarg's perception, nothing had changed. And that's the really insidious nature of Desolation. And that's why so many Desolates live in so much fear. And that is, of course, assuming you even know you're a Desolate. Now, there's one kind of caveat to this. Fairies, by their nature, can see the elements. They have something called elemental sight. And they can it's literally a part of the visual spectrum that they perceive. It's not something they have to turn on and off. It's always there. And so, if a fairy looks at a Desolate, they will identify them on sight. Some fairies will be able to identify that's a Desolate. Most will just see some kind of aberration. Now, here's the weird thing about Desolation. Let's say you've got a crowd of 50 people. All in a group, and one of them, 49 people, and one of them is a Desolate. And that Desolate's like, hey everyone, and everyone's like, hey. And they all start doing their will saves, and 48 of them succeed at their will saves, and one fails. That one person, in failing that will save, will be afflicted with your desolation, and it will spread instantly and without an additional will save. In other words, that one failure means the entire group of people now failed. So fairies are a deadly and serious threat to desolates, because a fairy will automatically fail any will save against a desolate, because they will see what you are instantly. And they will hate you instantly. Some fairies literally go insane with rage. Hanuel met a friend of theirs, who was someone that they had known during when the refugees were streaming in from Stonehold. And as was logical, there was a fairly large amount of desolates amongst the refugees, because I shouldn't even have to explain this. And the presence of so many of them had driven that fairy literally insane with rage, to the point where they had been clawing at their own skin and flesh and trying to just literally murder and brutally butcher everything that they saw, because they were gone. They were nothing but a feral animal at that point in time, and there was no reaching them. They were gone. And the same thing almost affected Hanuel themselves. Javan so far has been lucky into not have to follow into that, but that's because Javan's not a fairy anymore. Anyways, so that's how desolation works, and that's why fairies are so dangerous to them, and why it's so insidious, and why desolates live in such constant fear. And again, that's if you know you're a desolate. I've shared the story about the first desolate, the Nevere gentleman who was the mayor of his town. He didn't know he was a desolate. He was just living his life normally until one day a fairy showed up and said, "It's an abomination!" And again, that rippled. That fairy failed the save automatically, as is wont, so everyone in the town beat him to death. Their own mayor, someone they elected to power because they liked him, because he was their friend. Z has put a very personal touch on this. My sister is much better at down-to-earth stories than I am. And she did this wonderful little tidbit, which has already gone live. You can watch the sessions if you want to. But where she and her little sister had been... They had to run away from town at the age of about 5 because the townspeople, which included family, by the way, were trying to stone them to death because she was a desolate. People will put babies out on their front porches, not wanting to have anything to do with them. Or, if they're lucky, they might be put out, on the edges of town and might be picked up by someone else who might be able to take care of them. But a lot of them just die at such a young age. It's a horrible thing, and I want to get that across, too. This is not some power-up. When I first mentioned Desolation to, I forget who, to be honest with you, they're like, "Oh, that sounds awesome, I want my character to be a Desolate." And I feel like I've been fighting against that ever since, and trying to re-emphasize how horrible it is to be a Desolate. The very name tries to get across the point, because Desolates do get some bonuses to them. They can do something called translating. Now here's how translating works. It's a full round action, so it takes a full 6 seconds of concentrating and not moving around, and you get enveloped in this black and white light, and you end up, and it's a teleport. You teleport to wherever you want to go. There are limitations. You have to know where you're going. So if you have a perfect picture, or a very high, a significantly well-defined picture of where you're going, you can go there. If you've been there before, you can go there. There's kind of a caveat. If you've been there before, but it's changed since then, like if you've been into a canyon, but the canyon has since had a rock slide, and you try to translate there, you just won't. You will reappear where you left. Makes sense? Similarly, if you have this perfect picture of a place and you try to translate there and that picture is a lie or wrong, it won't work. You will have expended your use of that translation. You can only translate so many times a day, which is designed on a scaling thing to your level. In other words, most people who have levels pretty much don't have to worry about how many times they translate a day, especially after a certain point. But people who don't, which is the vast majority of Desolates, basically only have like 2 translates per day, and they have to really be careful about when they use them. Translation can also be used in a completely different way, same expenditure, to basically make a portal very large. You can fit, a whole cart and horses and whatnot into this portal without issue in order to translate other people through it as well. The catch is everyone knows that Desolates can translate, and the knowledge of the person is what triggers Desolation, which I'll talk more about in a minute. So it is a huge risk to do that portal or to translate in front of people, because you will have a ridiculously high risk of the people around you being afflicted with Desolation and trying to attack you. because of, whatever reason is made up in their mind. But I mentioned the they know you thing. It has been asked, well, why don't desolate people just hide their faces and whatnot? Magical. This is a magical problem. It's something literally wrong with the core soul of the individuals. So, for example, Guido was walking around in a full plate of armor with a helmet that completely obscured him, but they were aware of Guido, and Guido is a desolate. So he could have been calling himself Bob and never speaking and still being walking around, but the moment they became aware of him, the moment they saw him or heard about him, that's when they have to do the will save. That's when they have to try and resist his desolation. That's why when they went to the facility, in events that I will detail shortly, from my perspective, I don't know if it's already gone live from your perspective, when they went to the facility, Guido had to be transported inside a large coffin, basically, completely separate from everything else, so that they would not realize there was a person in that coffin, so nobody could be afflicted with his desolation. He was completely obscured from knowledge. Not just his identity, but his existence, right? That's how desolation works, and it sucks. Like I said, there are a few benefits from it, and it has a lot to do with the primary plot line of the setting, as you might imagine. And it has affected a fairly large amount of events throughout the course of history, as you might imagine. There is a gnome wandering around. Wizzle, I want to believe, is his name, who is wandering around, who's an expert in desolation, and he has been experimenting with weaving and technology in order to try and mask desolation, so that desolates can exist and coexist within society. Some people think of desolation as something to be cured. Now, I'm not going to give my opinion on that, because that's not the point. I'm not here to tell you what's right or wrong. But some people believe desolation is this horrible disease, and those poor desolates, we just need to cure them so they can be normal people again. And some people think that, no, I am normal, and we just need to find a way that we can get along without you trying to rip my throat out. There's nothing wrong with me, other than the thing that's wrong with me, right? If that makes any sense. And so there's a bit of tolerance issue when it comes to that. But Wizzle has been running around, and he has actually made a lot of strides. Some people have asked, why is it that Z, someone who is a very defined desolate, can walk around in plain view without people having to do will saves constantly? She had, past tense, a tattoo which was woven into her skin. The tattoo itself, there was actually no ink. It was literally magic that had been woven into her skin. I swear I didn't get this from Dragon Age 2. And that magic is something that completely hid the very nature of what she was. It is very powerful, very difficult to do, and it's the kind of thing you basically can't just buy on the market. The very fact that she was given that is actually a bit of a plot point. To this day, Z doesn't actually know why or how she was given that. Not really. She has theories, she has hints about it, because she did a lot of work for the Undermarket in the day, so she's just assumed the Undermarket gave it to her. But as she gets older and more involved in things, she starts to realize how rare of a gift that was. But it is possible to mask desolation. It is also possible there are things you can use that will temporarily mask desolation. They were, basically they have effectively charges, and each time someone becomes aware of your existence, a charge is expended to deflect their understanding of you, for lack of a better way to put it, so the desolation doesn't trigger. So that's another way to try and bypass the side effects there. We have had 2 desolates in the party. Both of them aren't anymore. Not really. Guido has moved on to become something else. Even he is not fully aware of what he is yet. Z has moved on to become something else. She is also not aware of what she is yet. Z died, was actually disintegrated into atomic ash, and that led to some interesting consequences, which we're still seeing the effects of. Guido decided to fiddle with his soul, which is what caused him to be a desolate in the first place, and then made a few interesting choices and has been continuing to make those choices, and we'll see where that goes. It wouldn't surprise me if Guido was the last boss of the campaign. Anyways, so that's Desolation. If anybody has any questions, as ever, feel free to ask. Comments, questions, like and subscribe. I'll see you around next time, guys.